This video covers several functions that can be used to process text strings in Excel. So let's start with this example. So we have some kind of visiting records. We have the ID and their number of visits. And here we would like to sum up the total visits made by one ID. For example, here you have ID, that's AA, so there's 10 visits here, and there's another 11 visits here. So the total would be 21, right? And similar, we want to do that for ID CAM and ID B space AE. So let's see what we do. From what we learned before, we know that you can try to use the sum ifs function, right? So we're summing over this range, and the criteria is based on ID, and we want the ID to be A16. Okay. And then you can see that this sum here only included this entry, the 11 visits, right? But not the first one. And we can try to do that for these other two IDs. Let me fix the reference here, and then we can. Okay, for CAM, we have two entries. One is 22 visits, the other is 10 visits. Right? But obviously here we only have the 22 visits. And for BAE, we have 5 visits and 13 visits. Right? But here we got nothing. So clearly there's something going on here. That's not. We're getting the result. That's not what we expected. Well, the reason is that if you look at this ID AA, right? So putting your cursor, if you double click into the cell, you can see that this blinking cursor is right after the second A. But if you look at this one, if you double click into the cell A2, you can see that there's some space between the blinking cursor and the second A. So that means there's a space after the second A. So in Excel, space is not equal to nothing, right? Although when you type a space, you see nothing, but space is actually something in Excel. So the first one would be AA space, and this one would be AA. So they're actually different, even though they look the same. So the way we handle that is, one way is to use the trim function. So we can do trim A2. So the trim function get rid of any leading and trailing spaces surrounding your text string. Right? So if you have a space before your string, text string, or after text string, the trim function will get rid of those spaces. Right? And the other thing is, if you do have spaces between letters or between characters, then the trim function will always just leave one space between any two characters. For example, here, if you look at this A8 carefully, there are actually 2 spaces between B and A. So after you apply the trim function to this text string, then now between B and A, you couldn't really see it, but between B and A, there's only one space left. Okay, so it gets rid of all the leading and trailing spaces and keep one space between 2 characters. So let's use the trimmed ID to do this again. Okay. So now we have trimmed IDs in this original data, but just to be safe, you also want to trim IDs in this search list. Okay, so if there's some unwanted spaces in this search list, then you will still get the wrong result. Okay, so we need to trim both the data and the search list. So here, the criteria is that we want these to be not just this, but the trimmed ID here. So we're going to do trim A16. So now we know that this is correct, right? So we know there are 10 visits and 11 visits, so total should be 21. Okay, so you can do the same thing for the other two. So I'm gonna fix the reference here. So now all the three results should be correct. Okay, you can double check these. Another way to get rid of the space is to use the substitute function. Okay. But this will only allow you to get rid of all the spaces, no matter whether it's leading, trailing, or in between. Okay. If you use the substitute, then you get rid of all spaces. So here the syntax is that within A2, okay, we would like to substitute a space. That's the first input. That's the second input here, right? So between these two quotes, we have a space. So we're substituting space with here between the two quotes. There's nothing. So that means we're substituting space with nothing. Okay, so that means we're getting rid of spaces. So now you can see that even the space between the two characters are gone. Right? And of course, you can also substitute space with, or basically using substitute function, you can substitute anything with anything else. For example, if I want to observe the location of the spaces in these original IDs, right? So I don't want to delete them, but I want to see where they are. So what I can do is I can substitute A2, replace space with, let's say, underscore. Okay. So now if you do this, then every space here will be replaced by an underscore. So now you can see them. Okay. So you can see all the spaces in this original data because now they're displayed as underscores. Okay, so in the next example, let's practice several other functions. Right? So first, let's practice the left function here. So we want the first two characters. We can use the left function to do that. A2, left 2. And the last two characters, we can use the right function to do that. And we also have a middle function. So here I want to extract the middle three characters starting from the fourth one. Okay, so you count to the fourth, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I want 3 of them. Okay, the next 3. Starting from the fourth. So I can do middle A2. So you can see the starting number because I'm starting from the fourth one and number of characters. This is how many characters I want to extract. I want to extract 3 of them. So in example 4, I would like to extract the city name out of these like city and state combinations, right? So the way we can do that is we can use the left function. So we know you can start from the left. So, but the question is, how many characters do you want to extract, right, from each one? Because based on because the lengths of each city name are all different. The lengths of each city name are all different. So we need to specify a changing length for the left function. Right? So what we can do is we can combine this left function with the find function. Okay. So what are we looking for? We're looking for commas. We're looking for commas in these text strings, and we're looking for comma in A2. Okay. So comma in A2 will tell me that what's the location of the comma in this text string. Right? For example, this one would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So this will be the 9th character in this string. So this find will return 9. But I want to extract from the beginning, right, this is left, to not to the 9th element, but here to the 8th, right? So I need to move back one step. So I'm going to do find -1. If you want to trim spaces around the city names, you can also add a trim. You can also add a trim outside what we have here. Outside what we have here, so that will trim the space. We also want to extract the state name from these combinations. So there are two ways you can extract the state name. One is to use the right function. The other is to use the middle function. Okay. So let's first consider how to use the middle function. So middle A2 start. So here the starting point for the state name is one character after the comma, right? So we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to find the comma first in A2 and add 1. Okay. So I start from one character after the comma, and then how many characters do I want to keep? So in this case, you probably want to keep 2, but in certain cases you can see that if there's some kind of space, that you might have to keep more than 2, like in this case. Right? So just to be safe, I'm going to say I want to keep 100. Well, it doesn't really matter because most of these strings only have 2 or 3 characters after the comma, so it won't go to 100 anyways. So I'm just putting a big number here to be safe. So here you can see for Florida, because there's a space here, so it gets space Florida. You can trim them too. Okay, I'll leave that to you. Another way to extract the city name is the state name is to go from the right. So start from the right. The question is, how many characters do you want to keep? So in this case, it's probably you just think, okay, if I start from the right, I only need to keep 2 characters, right? But there's no guarantee that's correct, because you could have some space after these state names. Right? If you have spaces after state names, you have to keep more than 2. So here, a more robust approach is to do right. But for a number of characters to keep, I would do use a function called the length. So the length function tells you how many characters are in this string. Okay, the total number of characters in this string, that's given by the length function. So I'm going to say the length function minus basically I want to exclude, because I'm starting from the right, I want to exclude everything since this comma, right? So I want to exclude everything to the left of the comma and including the comma. Okay, so I'm going to count the number of characters within this range, okay, starting from the beginning and all the way to the comma. So let's say in this case, I would do find A2, find comma in A2. That's it. So that's what I want. Okay, so let's take a closer look here. So what we get from the length function, if I do length function a2, right, I got 12. So that means there are a total of 12 characters in the string. Okay. And what do I get from find function? So I got 9. If I try to find the comma in this, then I got 9. So that means from the beginning all the way up to the comma, there are 9 characters. Okay, so that means after the comma, there are 3 characters left. Okay, so that's 12 minus 9. So 12 tells us there are a total of 12 characters. 9 tells us there are 9 up to this comma. So what's left? There are 3 characters. Then you can guess there's a space after tx. Right? So that's why when you start from the right in this case, you want to keep 1, 2, 3. You want to keep 3 characters. Okay, so that's why we say starting from the right and keep 12 minus 9, so 3 characters. So if you double click into this, you can see the space after x. Okay, finally I want to get rid of all the spaces in these names.